Hello and welcome to Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. I'm Brandi Kruse. Coming up on the show today, we've been talking all week about the Wendy Trainer case. I want to discuss today the fact that this is about more than one murder case. This is about more than justice for one family, although they absolutely deserve it. It is about our criminal justice system as a whole and the sense of safety and security in every single community in this state. Also coming up on the show today, the unbelievable request, speaking of safety and security, of Chicago gang members. Also, if you're an Amazon worker, you're going to have to bear with me today because I gotta say there are some Amazon workers who are just about the most well-paid whiners on the planet. Don't worry, not all of you, some of you. So we'll talk about all of that and more. First, if you have not become an Undivided subscriber already, please do so. I know there are some of you out there, you've been listening to the podcast for maybe almost 2 years, and you're just like, well, other people will pay $5. That's how we make the show work. undividedpod.com, undividedpod.com, $5 a month. I think it's a screaming good deal. Nicole agrees. Yeah. All right, I want to start the show today before we get to the latest in the Wendy Trainer case, because again, we made it our mission this week leading up to an expected court hearing tomorrow to raise holy hell about a plea deal for her killer. But first, a lawsuit has been filed against 5599, which we had talked about for months on end at the podcast, on the podcast, the Senate bill. If you're not familiar with it, essentially what Senate Bill 5599 did in Washington state is it expanded the reasons for that a minor could run away from home, seek shelter, and then their parents wouldn't be called. So under law, before this, it was only one reason. It was if you were beating your kid, then yeah, the shelter wasn't going to call you and tell you where your child was, which is common sense. But in some effort, I guess, to protect transgender youth, Democrats in Washington state said, hey, let's add something else to that. In addition to physical abuse, children can also run away from home and seek shelter if they are seeking protected health care. And that could be a variety of things that are already allowed for youth under the law without parental consent, things like gender hormone therapy, reproductive care, stuff like that. So an organization has filed suit called America First Legal. This is their press release. America First Legal sues Washington governor to block state-sanctioned kidnapping bill that allows state to hide kids seeking gender transition from parents. And so my initial question was, okay, what is their constitutional basis for the legal challenge? I'll also note that, and I'll discuss that momentarily, but it sounds like this was interesting. The America First Legal, Stephen Miller, who used to be a Trump advisor, this is like his entity or whatever, but they said in a news release that it said, citing, this is from our friends over at the Center Square, citing remarks made by state lawmakers, the lawsuit filed in U.S. District Court in Western Washington notes that, quote, nothing in the statute requires any finding that the parents kicked the child out of the home or in any other way neglected or abused their child to trigger the various constitutional infringements to parents that SB 5599 authorizes. And that's true. And that had been what I thought was one of the biggest lies told about 5599 is, oh, this is just to protect kids from parents who kick them out on the streets and they have nowhere else to go. Okay, I'm sure that that might be the case in some of these instances, but there's nothing in the law that says that. There's nothing in the law that has any sort of standard where a kid shows up and says, hey, if I'm not allowed to stay here, then my parents won't let me stay there, so I'm going to be homeless. And that was really, I think that was the way the Democrats tugged at people's heartstrings and said, if we don't do this, then kids are going to be homeless out on the streets and they're going to be trafficked. And they were first of all, they were assigning the worst intentions to every single parent in Washington state. And they were they were creating a bill based on a worst case scenario, a scenario that I don't even know exists. So I totally understand their rationale here. The statement goes on to say, in the eyes of these legislators, the parents' sin need be nothing more than the parents' desire to allow their child to mature before making permanent life-altering decisions about whether the child will ever be capable of becoming a biological parent. And then it goes on to say, from a constitutional basis, when it comes to how are they challenging 5599, it says that it infringes on parental constitutional rights under the First and 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution based on numerous U.S. Supreme Court cases concerning parental rights. And so I think this was expected and anticipated that there would be some sort of lawsuit. You know, there was an effort to get a referendum on the ballot. That failed. There's this lawsuit. We'll see where this goes. There's also an initiative to the legislature that is ongoing. So there are various efforts, thankfully, to try to roll back what I really believe is a misguided, albeit maybe well-intended in some lawmakers. It tugged at their heartstrings and they didn't fully understand or care to comprehend what they were supporting. But I think it's not only misguided, but I think if we can't find a way to stop 5599, I'm really scared about what's going to come up this next legislative session, because I think it emboldens them to say, hey, you know, we can parent better than you can, and we're going to make laws that give the government more right to tell kids you can do these things without parental consent, and that's just not right. It's not common sense. That shouldn't be political. It bothers me that this has become a left and right issue when I know that there's a whole swath of Washingtonians in the middle who understand that, again, maybe some lawmakers were well-intended. They wanted to protect kids who are going through a challenging season in their life, but this is not the way to go about it. Making it easier for kids to run away from home and away from what could be a very loving family unit is just absurd. It's ridiculous. So we are, of course, going to track this lawsuit through the system to see if it has any legs. I mean, in Washington State, I wouldn't necessarily hold your breath, but I'm glad someone is going for it to see what happens. Okay, we've been talking all week about the Wendy Trainer case, and you might be wondering, you know, why so much focus on one murder case? There's a variety of, unfortunately, horrible crimes happening in Washington State. And to me, what the Wendy Trainer, first of all, she deserves justice. You know, she was killed in 2017 in cold blood by her estranged boyfriend, Joshua Ellis. What her family has been through in the last 6 years is unfathomable. But I think this case is also reflective of a larger issue in our criminal justice system where criminals are prioritized over victims. But more than that, when someone like Joshua Ellis is given a slap on the wrist, it emboldens criminals everywhere. It emboldens the criminal element. We see that from the most serious crimes in our state to low-level crimes, where often there aren't even arrests made or there aren't even reports taken. And when you have criminals who understand that in this state they can get away with an increasingly serious level of criminal behavior, then they're going to engage in that criminal behavior even more. And so we simply have to draw a line and say, no, justice matters. Justice matters not only for the victim and for their family, but finding true justice matters for society as a whole and for respect for the rule of law. And that's why we're focusing so much on the Wendy Trainer case before this expected court hearing tomorrow, where Joshua Ellis is going to be floated a sweetheart plea deal that lets him walk out of prison by 2025. Crazy stuff. But we've been having some interviews on this week, and the original elected prosecutor in Pierce County in 2017, when Wendy Trainer was murdered, was Mark Lindquist. He was featured, in fact, here's a Cairo 7 news story from the first court appearance that Joshua Ellis made back in 2017.
It was a frighteningly familiar refrain in this Pierce County courtroom. A woman dead.
The victim suffered one gunshot to the head, which was fatal.
A boyfriend accused of her murder.
Detectives found ammunition in his car that matched up with a casing left at the murder scene.
A family grieving.
Our hearts are shattered. We are filled with anger.
Yeah, and given his office's handling of this case originally and the fact that he was the elected prosecutor when the case was first charged against Joshua Ellis, Mark Lindquist, even though he's not in office anymore, he was nice enough to come up and chat with us about not only what happened to Wendy Trainer, 5 years ago, but also about what's happening with the case today. Mark Lindquist, good to see you. Welcome to Undivided.
Good to see you too. Thank you.
Yeah, so tell people what you've been up to.
Well, I've been in private practice for a few years doing personal injury, primarily wrongful death, plane crashes, government misconduct, that sort of thing.
Do you miss being an elected prosecutor with all the drama that comes along with it?
Private practice is a lot less hassles, a lot more money, but I look back on the public service and I'm grateful I had those opportunities, and I'm proud of the work that we did.
Yeah, and I didn't bring you here. I didn't ask you to come in today to, criticize the current prosecutor, anything like that, but I think you offer some valuable insight into not just this case, but just generally how unusual some of the aspects of what's happening in this case are. Do you remember the Wendy Trainer case from when you were in office?
I do, yes.
Yeah, I mean, the nature of it is horrifying.
It is, yes.
Yeah. So from your perspective back then, I mean, as you approach a case like this as a prosecutor, young girl, 25 years old, family found her. I mean, her uncle and her dad, you can imagine, as a father, what that would be like, finding her. How closely do prosecutors typically work with family members when it comes to a murder trial?
Prosecutors' offices obviously have limited resources. You have to prioritize. And among the top cases in your priorities are the homicides, and particularly a domestic violence homicide of this nature. So to answer your question, you work very closely usually with the family. You keep them up to speed on all the developments. You know, as a prosecutor, you're representing the entire community, but that includes the victim's family.
Is that how much is the family's hopes for the case and their opinion on the case taken into consideration? I mean, you have obviously what a prosecutor thinks can be accomplished, right? Versus what a family hopes for. So to what extent does the family's desires actually influence the way a prosecutor approaches a case?
Prosecutors absolutely take into account the feelings of the victims' families. And you see it across the board. You know, there's some families who come in and just like, you know, this has already taken a huge toll on our family. We're sick of it. Is there some way you can get this resolved and not go to trial?
So some families are like, is there a plea deal just to avoid trial?
Correct.
Yeah.
And other families are, you know, this has torn us up and we want justice. Yeah. And we want to see accountability here. And so you see families coming on all sides of that spectrum. And the ultimate decision has to rest with the prosecutor's office. As you said, it's, you know, we're realistic about what can be done versus what a victim's family would like to be done. I mean, you know, let's face it, sometimes you get people who are pretty riled up about their burglary, understandably, and they want to know why the defendant's not going away for the rest of his life.
Right.
You know, you have to explain it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
But certainly in a high-priority case like this, the victim's family's feelings would weigh heavily in the calculation of what is justice.
Yeah. And in this case, and I know that you follow the news closely, but you know, you've been out of the prosecutor's office for 4 years now.
Yeah, about 4 years.
About 4 years. So when you hear that Wendy Trainer's case, you know, she's murdered while you were in office as the prosecutor, when you hear that we're talking about the potential that the man who killed her, who admitted to killing her, could get a deal that could see him out of prison 2 years from now, how does that strike you?
You know, I was saying earlier about in private practice, I'm still doing the same things I was doing before, which is working with victim families, holding the bad guys accountable, you know, seeking justice. So that's still a part of who I am as a lawyer and as a person. And when I hear about a case, I want to see that justice was done. I want to see that the bad guy was held accountable. I want to see that the family feels like justice, you know, was achieved by the system.
And tell me if I'm wrong, tell me if I'm misinterpreting things. Usually when I see prosecutors float a deal like this, which common sense tells me is way too lenient, usually that tells me there's something fundamentally wrong with the case, where they're like, either it's this or nothing. Either it's this or he's going to walk at trial. Is that a fair assumption on my part of why typically you'd see such a lenient plea for someone who did something so egregious?
Yeah, fair and correct. Number one, it does seem way too lenient. And number two, it's weird there hasn't been an explanation.
I hate to have you guess, but is there anything you can think of that would be a legitimate reason to offer Joshua Ellis such a lenient plea?
No. 12 jurors already found him guilty.
Yeah. And the fundamental, and I should address this with you, although I think it came to a conclusion after you left office, but he was already found guilty at trial. He had an original trial in 2019. The prosecutor in that case, I believe it was John Neeb, a court of appeals found that he unduly prejudiced the jury. He made a reference to the People versus O.J. Simpson. Do you have an opinion on whether that appellate court was accurate in its finding?
Well, it's a two-prong test. The first is, did the prosecutor commit misconduct?
Yes.
And the second is, did that taint the verdict? Did it affect the jury's verdict? As to the first prong, I think the court had been very strongly sending the message for years that if you stray into the area of race in a way that we think is going to prejudice the jury, that's misconduct.
Yeah.
So not surprised at all the court found that his comments about OJ were misconduct. As to the second prong, normally the burden is on the defense to show that the misconduct affected the jury's verdict. But what the court found was that the misconduct was so flagrant and ill-intentioned that the burden was actually on the prosecutor to show beyond a reasonable doubt that the misconduct did not affect the verdict.
And that seems like it would be impossible to do.
Well, difficult.
What would you have to do? Call up the jurors and say, hey, did this sway your decision? Well, how would you prove that?
No, you would just have to go through the record, and typically what you would argue is look at the evidence, and regardless of these comments during, and keep in mind, these comments were made during jury selection.
Yes.
But that these comments didn't affect the jury's verdict because the juror's verdict was based on the evidence. And here's the evidence, A, B, C, D, E. In this case, for example, the defendant took the stand and told his story, and 12 jurors didn't buy it.
Yeah, well, he's told his story of self-defense, which
Correct.
Even the judge in the case, when he was handing down the maximum sentence he could, said, I've dealt with self-defense cases, and this ain't it. This isn't by any stretch a self-defense case. So given that, the only issue I've read about with the case against Joshua Ellis was something that happened, as you said, in jury selection, before the trial even began. I've heard of no issues with the actual facts of the case or the ability, obviously, to obtain a conviction at trial. So when it comes to trying him a second time, what do prosecutors typically weigh in? Hey, regardless of the reason the first trial, maybe it's a hung jury, or in this case it was overturned by an appeal court, how does a prosecutor's office weigh, is this a case we ought to try again?
Well, again, when 12 jurors have already said, we don't buy the defendant's story, he's guilty, you got a green light to retry that case.
Yeah.
What you would do, though, is look at what can we do better next time, especially if it's a hung jury. And here, you know what you could do better. Stay away from the OJ trial.
Yeah, don't mention OJ Simpson
Right.
during jury
that's
selection.
Exactly.
Seems pretty easy.
Right.
So what would your advice be, I guess, to the families? You've been on the other side. You've had families come to you. You've had families plea with you. The court hearing in this case is on Friday, unless it gets changed again. What advice could you offer the family for how they might be able to urge the prosecutor's office to take a different path?
Well, a prosecutor's office ought to listen to the community, certainly ought to listen to a victim's family. And it was always my philosophy that a prosecutor's office should communicate with the victim's family and with the public, which is why you and I had so many conversations back in the day.
We did.
So you appeal to that. You appeal to the prosecutor's office sense of responsibility to the community and to the victim's family. And I know the family's done at least one thing right at this point, which is I hired my friend Ann Bremner. So I'm hoping Ann will get a meeting with the prosecutor's office and have a conversation about this.
On a broader scale, what message do you think it sends to the people of Pierce County if someone can murder an ex-girlfriend in cold blood, shoot her in the back of the head, and walk out of prison in 8 years?
Yeah, it sends a horrible message, and quite frankly, that kind of messaging has contributed to a high crime rate in Pierce County. When the criminal subculture starts to think there are no consequences, no accountability, people run amok.
I like that, criminal subculture.
And there is, and they communicate.
I'm going to steal that phrase because that really, I think, speaks to what's going on. And it's been, since you left office in 2019, the crime crisis, and I'm not saying, Mark left office and now the criminals are running amok.
Yeah, it's a bigger problem than one guy leaving office, but yes.
What do you make of the current state of our criminal justice system and how much it has changed in 5 years?
That's a big subject.
It is.
It's a tough time right now to, I think, be in law enforcement and to be a prosecutor. But being a prosecutor has always been a tough job, and you have to kind of have a thick hide and just decide you're going to do what's right no matter what. So even if you think you're going to be criticized for vigorously prosecuting and for holding people accountable, do it if you think it's the right thing to do.
But doing what you think is the right thing to do is a very relative thing.
Yeah. I have a hard time thinking anyone thinks it's the right thing to do to give a guy who's been convicted of murder a sweetheart deal. How's that right? I feel bad for this family. They've been victimized 3 times. First by the murder, second by the reversal of the conviction, and now thirdly, potentially by this plea bargain. So, I hope the prosecutor's office steps up and tries to do what's right for the family and also for the community.
Yeah, and we certainly share that hope. We appreciate Mark Lindquist coming in, even though he is no longer the elected prosecutor, and reflecting on the case and where things are right now. We hope that you feel like you have gotten sufficient insight and information on the Wendy Trainer case this week. Again, tomorrow we're expecting this hearing to happen at 1:30. We haven't heard any indication that it's going to be postponed. We haven't heard any indication that the plea deal that was floated to Joshua Ellis has been reconsidered, but we will certainly keep you up to date on that. We'll also have a story coming out on Patreon and Locals a little bit later today. We're going to lift the paywall on it, and I encourage you to share it so we can make sure as many people as possible have an opportunity to reach out to the current elected prosecutor in Pierce County to share their frustrations with what this means for the rule of law in their county and in their communities. All right, coming up next, Amazon workers, a small group, I think, of Amazon workers are once again complaining about having to work from the office, and the Seattle Times is once again giving them the platform to complain about having to work from the office. But first, we've been talking about Sell with Wes on the show for some time now, a wonderful real estate agent in our area, and I've been telling you over and over about this really cool service that they offer called the Listing Boost Concierge Service. Well, I got a chance to talk to a Sell with Wes client who actually used it, had a wonderful experience. Susan in Federal Way, she'd been living in her house for 25 years, needed to sell it. She didn't need that much space anymore, but she knew that it needed some work done.
I knew I had to paint. I knew I needed to get new flooring. I needed to get new lighting. I told him up front that I was very interested, that I did not have the time or the finances to do what needed to be done. And he immediately jumped in with, well, I do. Work started immediately. And I would say in 2 to 3 weeks, they had landscaping done. They had all the painting done. The new floors were put in. All the lighting was put in. It just was all so fast. And the rest is history. It was on the market for 7 days. I was able to get well over listing price.
To be specific, Susan got 20 offers, sold it for 15% over list price, and ended up getting $200,000 more than an investor offered her before the renovations. Yeah, so if you're thinking of selling your home, think about that. She was ready to sell it to someone as is that they were going to do a flip on, and she just called Wes Jones with sellwithwes.com, and she ended up getting $200,000 more for it, which is awesome, and just took a lot of pressure and stress off of her, I think, as she was trying to move. So visit sellwithwes.com, sellwithwes.com, even if you're in the early stages of considering, do I want to sell my home? Start by simply using their home value calculator to see how much your home is worth. It might be worth more than you think. Sellwithwes.com, a better way to sell your home. Oh, for the love. Amazon workers. Listen, I know we have some Amazon workers. I love you guys. I'm not trying to vilify Amazon's entire workforce. In fact, I think this is like a minute fraction of 1% of the workforce that is just incredibly whiny about the work from office situation. And then you have the Seattle Times that, and again, I think this is politically motivated. The Seattle Times and probably labor wants to be like, let's vilify Amazon because that's the popular thing to do. And so over and over, the Seattle Times publishes these stories just, feeling so bad for these poor, overpaid, maybe not overpaid, well-paid, well-compensated Amazon workers. So here's the article, latest article. Again, they publish this, I feel like every month. From the Seattle Times, Amazon relies on, quote, serendipity for office returns. Employees want data. And in it talks about a man named Adam Slipsky. He's the head of Amazon's cloud computing business, and some comments he made to employees in a meeting about, the pushback over, hey, we don't want to return to the office. We want to be able to do remote work. Nicole, bless her heart, went through this entire article to pull out all the whiny things that these Amazon workers had to say. So it says in the Seattle Times article, serendipity seemed to be the crux of Slipsky's argument for a return to office mandate. He said, quote, actual data, it's very hard to come by, especially any data that I think would withstand scrutiny. So his argument on serendipity is, hey, if you're in the office, who knows what kind of collaboration and what that could lead to, et cetera. It goes on to say, for some Amazon employees, serendipity isn't enough. Workers who have asked the company to share data have been provided anecdotes, and a consistent trope that innovation is more likely to happen in person. It goes on to say, that has left some workers feeling demoralized, distracted, and undervalued as they struggle to stay focused and motivated, according to interviews and internal communication shared with the Times. First of all, I'm going to keep going here, but distracted and undervalued and demoralized because you have to be in the office, something that I imagine you signed up for when you initially took the job, unless you started at Amazon during the pandemic and have always done remote work. Again, it is a job. Like, this isn't a forced or some sort of volunteerism. Like, you can leave if you don't like it. Goes on to say, an Amazon manager who is based on the East Coast and asked to speak anonymously to protect their job said, quote, "It is dehumanizing." Oh, a well-paid job at a tech company is dehumanizing, and feels as if leadership doesn't trust its employees to understand their reasoning. I would like one of these Amazon workers to go work at a sweatshop in Central America or in India and then talk about dehumanizing. In Slack messages, employees anonymously posted that Amazon's decisions were, I didn't read that, dystopian, and creating, quote, "just a horrible situation." Goes on to say that employee said it can be hard to focus on work with so much uncertainty. Many coworkers turned to Slack to make sense of what Amazon shared. Quote, "You can spend your whole day watching the Slack channel and see things change hour by hour." And then they talked about Amazon CEO Andy Jassy in the article, saying Jassy also opted not to share data about return to office in an all-hands meeting he led. According to the AWS employee, Jassy instead answered a question about the types of music he had been listening to, which, again, the Seattle Times bias against Amazon is just, it reeks of it, because I'm going to venture to guess that Andy Jassy answered questions on a variety of topics, not just about what kind of music he's listening to, and then said, no, I'm not going to provide data, or I don't have data. And Seattle Times is like, what is the most frivolous thing he answered a question on? And let's compare that to this. I feel bad because I know that I always get people in the comments who watch the show who are like, no, I think that it's, they should offer, for some people who got used to it, maybe can't afford daycare or whatever, or they have tailored their lives to a work from home environment. They feel like they're being forced back into the office for no justifiable reason. But I keep going back to, then leave.
Yeah.
Then leave. Jobs are not a prison.
Right.
And
this
especially,
is not North Korea.
Right. Especially when you have very marketable skills. I mean, if you're working at Amazon, in Amazon headquarters, especially in actual tech jobs, I know that you're well paid. Yeah. And I know that there are a bevy of other places you could work who probably would allow you to work remotely. And I know sometimes it's not as easy as just quit your job then. But when you're saying that you feel demoralized, distracted, undervalued, dehumanized, that you working in a dystopian environment and, quote, just a horrible situation.
Why do you work there?
Why do you work there? I have to believe that this is, what is Amazon's global workforce? I mean, tens of thousands of people.
Oh, yeah.
And in Seattle, tens of thousands of people.
I think it was, wasn't it 30,000 and then 1,000 did that walkout at lunch or whatever?
Yeah. And so what you have is, there's a couple things. The Seattle Times and the Seattle media has always tried to vilify Amazon. And it's like, without, I'm not going to bootlick Amazon. Do I think there's issues with the company and issues that they've created in Seattle in terms of cost of living? Of course. Like, I'm not ridiculous, but I also understand the net good that they are for the city. And especially right now, when you need those workers down there shopping, walking around and all of that, to continue this narrative of vilifying Amazon is at the city's own peril.
Yep.
And again, giving a voice to what I think is a minute fraction of workers who feel like they're working at a dystopian company.
Right. I think those
have blue hair, let's be honest. Sorry,
those
that's
comments
me.
are a little bit ridiculous, but I also think that, yes, like, it is nice to work from home for some people. Some people are people and need to go to work and thrive off that situation. But some people would rather work from home. But then you should just find a job that does that, because your company is either going to say, like, which is more valuable, you as an employee, you personally as an employee, or bringing people together at work. And in this case, they're choosing bringing people together in work, not you.
And so, I will be clear. I'm not going to say that Amazon's motivations for back to the office are wholly benevolent, right? I think that we know a lot of tech sectors are having to lay off employees, and I think that was part of it, which is like, hey, instead of forced layoffs, let's see who opts not to come back because we make them come to the office. I absolutely think that's part of it. But at the end of the day, who cares? It's not my job to question what they're doing with their business or whatever. Like, if that's the decision they make, regardless of the motivation, then those are the decisions that you as an employee have the free will to decide, is that a company I want to work for? A company that, as you said, would say they don't value me individually as an employee enough to make an exception, so I'm going to go somewhere where they do.
Right.
But I think a lot of this is contrived. I think it's critical to note that.
Right.
I think a lot of this is contrived, and the media eats it up because it's fun to vilify Amazon. You just wait. I don't think people realize, we talked about this with Nordstrom the other day, that you just wait. How much is Nordstrom willing to deal with downtown and in these areas before they pull up stakes like they did in San Francisco? And you will not believe the detriment that would have to downtown Seattle if Nordstrom leaves.
Right.
And the same, Amazon, they've already pulled jobs over to Bellevue.
Starbucks.
Right. And Starbucks, the Starbucks that closed up.
And nobody's talking about that too. This is Amazon. Seattle Times is vilifying Amazon for this, but Nordstrom has done the same thing. Nordstrom made people move back to the area to go back to work.
Yeah, we have a friend who they moved like an hour and a half away, and then they found out, well, now I got to come back to the office a couple days a week.
And then and Starbucks has done the same. All of the big corporations down there. I definitely think there was this joint effort saying we're going to try to save the city by bringing everybody back to the city, right? Not to endanger their employees because of the danger of the city, but it needs business to survive.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and 100%. And so I do think that was part of it. Amazon has been a good corporate citizen.
Right.
Anyone who wants to vilify Amazon and doesn't look at like their charitable contributions, what they're doing in Bellevue to help with their 30-year plan, I think there are bad corporations. Amazon isn't one of them.
Right.
Again, are they perfect? No. You can't have that many employees and not have issues.
Right.
And I'm not saying it's not okay for employees to advocate for better treatment or better hours or better working conditions. Absolutely. But this is unhinged.
It is.
It's unhinged. And again, you go spend 1 week working at a company in Central America or in India or something. It's like when people call this a police state, right? Which my dad always used to call things a police state because he didn't particularly like the police or government in any way or whatever. And I'm like, you go to Mexico and you tell me about America's police state. Last time I was in Mexico, I'm really getting off the rails now, but last time I was in Mexico City, my friend Johnny and I were walking, we've got an open beer because we'd seen people with beer everywhere. And of course, we're the white people with beers, and the cops are like, we've got to take you to the embassy. And I'm like, all right, how much money do you want? And I just gave him money, and then we carried on our way. But again, I think that this is just, it reeks of people who've never dealt with a real, genuine challenge in their life and who have never been told you're wrong, have never been had, they've never had any sort of pushback or, it's just, it's very Seattle.
It's very entitled.
Entitled. It's very Seattle.
Yes.
Yes. But again, anyway, so interesting. I almost think, though, worse than the employees who are calling it dystopian to have to work from the office in a high-paying job is the Seattle Times continuing to give it as much energy as they are.
Right. Because, and this article is mostly, it's focused on the fact that Amazon won't show them data. Won't show them data.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't think those are all things that you can quantify, right? Because of the bringing back to the city, what that does for the city, all of these things. So it's not just that you're more productive as an employee if you're here.
Right.
That's not what they're saying. I don't think that's ever what they said. But.
Yeah, Matt Gilbert said, as a tech worker, I don't believe Amazon needs to provide data, but in tech, a lot of decisions are made based on data, and there seems to be a disconnect. And I don't disagree with that. But again, what kind of data? I'm struggling to understand how you quantify the benefits of people working together in that environment. How do you quantify the benefits of collaboration? I'm sure there are some metrics like, increased productivity or whatever it is. But anyway, I don't mean to always sound like a shill for Amazon, but I just think they're so unfairly vilified considering everything that they bring to the community and the small businesses that they keep operational with their workforce.
And this week actually is when the new one in Arlington, that new Monstropolis, whatever you call it.
Monstrosity
or monstrosity.
Okay.
But it opened this week. They started on Monday.
Packaging center?
I think it's a little bit of everything, but thousands. So yeah,
of
it's
jobs.
pretty cool.
JOBS is
contributing to the area for sure.
Jobs that you can either apply for or not.
Or not.
It is your choice. All right. I feel like that should have been on our segment Unbelievable. But on our segment Unbelievable today, gangbangers in Chicago are being encouraged to stop shooting each other, but only during certain hours of the day. Let's get to it in our segment Unbelievable. Oh, this one's a fun one today. You know, when you can't stop the gang violence in Chicago, you just make a plea for them to avoid shooting each other, getting in shootouts, drive-by shootouts, just during certain times of the day. You know, that's not really so much to ask. Here's the article from CWB Chicago. Chicago group wants gangbangers to refrain from firing guns between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. That's not too much to ask.
That seems pretty reasonable.
Seems very reasonable.
Give us time to hide.
So apparently this request came from not the government, but a community group on the north side called Rogers. It's a Rogers Park-based Native Sons. They sent it out in a newsletter. And this is an area of the city where shootings have been up significantly and were already bad. And so they're struggling with an increase. And there's a believed gang war, according to this publication, between two rival gangs, the Gangster Disciples and the Black Pea Stones. So things are bad, even worse than normal. And the co-founder of Native Sons said, "We have to start somewhere. Our goal is to approach our city's gun violence problem strategically and not all at once." Things didn't become this way overnight, and change won't happen overnight, and I actually agree with that. I mean, you have to stop the hemorrhaging. And they say under this ordinance, which again, it's just like a loose thing they asked for, we ask that people stop associating with glorifying shooters, stop glorifying switches, which I don't know what that means, like a switch, a knife switch, and stop wearing those ski masks everywhere, which perpetuates you as some op. Wow, they're using a lot of language that I don't even understand. When those who live a certain lifestyle try to hang with regular class citizens, they put everyone at risk. Oh, it says here, switches are aftermarket devices that turn some semi-automatic handguns into automatic firing weapons. Okay, that's good. Wow. They went on to say, if people know that after a certain hour, the likelihood of them being shot by an unknown, unprovoked assailant are at a higher risk, they will be less likely to be out and about, and they may become more proactive with supervision of their children. So basically they're saying, I was looking for this one quote. They said, let's see, we're not waiting for a bill or law to enforce what we feel needs to be done. This is a movement being carried along by social media and the media. Not everyone is willing to drop their beef. If you aren't mentally and emotionally equipped to solve disputes in a healthy manner, if you can't help but harm each other, do so in a capacity in which children, elderly, and those not involved in high-risk activities are less likely to be effective. So that's their plea to the gang members, is if you aren't willing to drop your beef, at least carry your beef out in a way where innocent people aren't going to be as affected. So what happens? Like the Gangster Disciples and the other ones come together like, listen, let's
go on graveyard shift.
Yes, graveyard, which I shouldn't laugh because it actually turns into graveyard shift because so many of them died. But then they're like, hey, let's make a truce that there's a ceasefire during the day. I don't find that likely.
I don't find it likely because I think that you'll just create this element of surprise for some, right? So then they'll think they're like good to go, and then they'll be taken out. So I don't think anybody's going to trust another gang.
No, one will agree to it, and then the other one will be like, haha, yeah, this is ridiculous stuff. And it's interesting. You got to try. It's better than Lori Lightfoot. What did Lori Lightfoot try to do, right? That sounds like actually. When she left the mayor's office, did she get a job with this organization?
Right. She tried the curfew thing too, I think.
That actually sounds like, well, curfews are different. Because curfews to me, and it's why I agreed with them with the rioting situations in Seattle, because you run into these situations where you could have a big group of people, right? And 1% of them were actually a criminal element. Same with some riots that rioters would infiltrate protesters. But if you set a curfew, everyone there is breaking the law after that time. So if there's no curfew, then you're like, who's breaking the law and who's not? And it's really hard to differentiate. A curfew says, if I see you, you're already breaking the law and I can contact you, I can arrest you. Right. So I actually like the idea of a curfew. This is nothing. This is a request. And I will hope that the gangbangers consider it. But somehow I find it very unbelievable that they would. All right, coming up next, Florida Report. But first, how does saving a little bit of money sound, especially with gas prices? People, I'm trying to save you money here, okay? help me help you. Help me help you. Mike and I took the First Mark Challenge back in the spring, and we love working with First Mark Insurance, not only personally, but on the show as well, because they do so much good for their clients, and it's such a wonderful service that is of no cost to you. Everyone needs insurance, right? So why not you got your home insurance, you got your car insurance, whatever other insurance you have. No matter what happens, you have to file a claim for your house, for your car, for your RV. You call one place. You call First Mark Insurance and say, hey, can you handle this for me? So to me, it's really convenient, but a lot of people also save money by switching over to First Mark. I spoke to a woman who's saving $100 a month, $1,200 a year, which is a lot. So you start by taking the First Mark Challenge. You go to firstmarkinsurance.com. It just takes a little bit of your time to do it. You can do it virtually. Dave Taylor is the CEO of First Mark, and he explained what it entails.
We believe and we say that we will help 100% of the people that we work with. Okay. Now that doesn't mean necessarily that 100% of the people we work with are going to become First Mark clients, but we believe that we will actually help 100% of the people, whether that be stay with your current carrier, but let's modify your coverage a bit so you're better protected, or ultimately, hopefully come over to First Mark. We're going to put you with a different company and give you better coverage, right? So the challenge is really challenging individuals to give us an opportunity to prove that to them. That's really what the First Mark Challenge is.
Yeah, really cool. And again, I think it's just a no-brainer to do it and see what comes of it. But you can get better insurance, better service at a better price. And so I recommend that everyone go to firstmarkinsurance.com, firstmarkinsurance.com, click on the button to take the First Mark Challenge. First Mark Insurance, they work for you. Okay, you know it's Thursday. It is that time of the week where we dip outside of Washington State to see what's happening elsewhere in the country, specifically in the Sunshine State. It is our segment, Florida Report.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
Miranda. Hey, yo. We were debating whether I could say konnichiwa or whether I would get in trouble for that. And you pointed out that I've said hola before, so both would be offensive to some people, although we don't necessarily care so much. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Interesting to see Ron DeSantis absolutely crap the bed.
Yeah, he's not doing so well. I mean, I could have kind of predicted this, the way he was kind of just hanging on to some kind of annoying topics that I think people want him to talk about what he's successful doing and the things that he has done in Florida that have made him successful. But I just don't think he led with the right foot. So he's not doing so great in this whole campaign situation.
Yeah, and as we've said before, he can't try to beat Trump. Trump is Trump, and Trump is still in the race, at least for the time being. And so he should have found another avenue to carve out for himself. So not a surprise to see him tanking in the polls. And typically in presidential races, when you see someone really, take a dive, it's hard to resuscitate that. And there's some other people who are seemingly coming up, in that place, Tim Scott, Vivek Ramaswamy. So we'll see what happens. But there's this interesting article in the Miami New Times. I think it's being a little disingenuous, but it has to do with Florida students who are going to return to public schools in the fall, and they will be met with new rules, a bunch of new rules, but one of them regulates the ability for teachers and staff to use a quote-unquote nickname for a kid at school.
Correct. It basically will try to use something easy, like if my name is Tammy and I want to be called Tam, or if my name is Catherine and I want to be called Kate or Katie in school, I have to get my parents' permission to sign off on a form that allows teachers and people within the school district to call me by my nickname. I'm not sure what to make of that.
Well, I think that's also just the way that this article frames it is disingenuous. It's like, oh, you have to, just like you said, it's like, oh, Kate or Catherine. The rule is designed to guard against kids who go to school and they want to be identified as a completely different gender and a completely different name. I mean, that's really what it's about, right? It's about parents signing off on so your kid doesn't go to school and be called Timmy when their name is Tammy at home. And so
okay.
I think the way that the article frames it makes it seem like this vicious, unnecessary government overreach if you just want to be called Kate and your name's Catherine. But I think everyone knows what it was really about.
It's true. And honestly, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where the rules apply to everybody. So it probably does come down to, it's going to come down to those simple kind of nicknames. And most parents are probably going to be completely okay with just signing off a quick form that amongst the dozens of other forms that come with having kids in schools. just to allow your kid to be called the name they prefer to be called. And if they don't agree, then they don't agree. And the kids are going to have to deal with that with their parents and at home as a family and not at school.
Yeah, I love this. I think this is absolutely harmless. I think it's weird where, when in Washington State, for instance, you can have a kid and policy allows for this. We've talked about it many times, they're the gender they were born at home, the name they were given at birth at home, and then you send them to school and the teachers and the students and everyone keeps the secret that the kid is identifying as a different gender and they're calling them a whole different name and they're living like two different lives. That's weird. It's a weird thing to do to a child and a parental relationship. Super odd. Yeah. So we could sit here and talk about DeSantis news forever, but I don't know. I don't know that he's as interesting to me anymore, although we'll see what happens. But I did want to talk about an interesting, it's kind of funny, but it's actually a little precedent setting, as I know you're going to discuss. There is an inmate in Florida prisons who has fought for an interesting right.
Yeah, he's been for years fighting for his right to grow a beard. Based on some of the principles of his religion, he should have a fist-length beard is what the length he is aiming for. And the grooming rules are different in every state, but in Florida, you either have to have a clean shaven face or you can have a half-inch beard that you maintain. And that's it. Those are the rules. There's no reason beyond that to get him. But they're actually in an appeals court. They're starting to hear this guy's case out. And there's a very good chance that he's going to be allowed to grow his beard out for religious reasons, which could actually change the way a lot of prisons across the country decide to do things, because I think inmates have to fight for a lot of basic human rights and religious rights, and even criminals deserve to have a little bit of what would you call it? Just I guess respect for a certain extent. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't think your right to practice religion should be stripped from you because you're incarcerated. I mean, I think there are some things within reason, but I don't see a problem with if they can articulate from a perspective about, what their religion entails. I mean, the challenge is always how might that be abused, right? How might that be abused in a setting like a prison? Will somebody grow, I'm just giving a crazy example, a 10-foot beard, then use it to hang someone? I'm just being ridiculous, but I think you always, within reason, they're this is my religion. I need a beard that's as long as a rope, Yeah. But I think it's an interesting concept. And again, I think freedom of religion, I don't think that you give that up because you're incarcerated, although this individual sounds like they're going to be there for quite some time. But I think it's an interesting debate that, as you said, is going to have nationwide implications. So good stuff, Miranda.
Yes. Don't thank me. Thank the state of Florida.
Are you sad to no longer be the only Kruse sibling with bangs?
I am, and you cut yours shorter, and mine are now growing out. Even though I did get a little nibble on them from my bunnies the other day, so they're keeping up the work.
Yeah, I'm struggling daily with trying to figure out what to do with the bangs because they just get in my face, and so I'll have to talk to you later and get some bang tips.
I feel you. I don't think there's a woman out there who's gone through a bang phase that didn't struggle with the bangs for a little bit. And then finally they kind of they make things fun. Like we talked about, ponytails are way more fun when you have some good bangs to accessorize them with.
They look way better. Only the most important conversations on the Undivided podcast in Florida Report. Miranda, thank you.
Bye.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
Yeah, the bang situation. Real daily struggle trying to figure out what to do with my new wedding bangs. The things we do to look good on our wedding day. Speaking of, wow, I'm good at this. EastsideWeightLossClinic.com. EastsideWeightLossClinic.com. One of probably the best things I did before my wedding is to drop my COVID weight. I've lost 36 pounds since I started the program. I started last November, and then within 2 months, I had lost most of the weight, and I've been able to keep it off ever since, which I think is a big part. I think there's a lot of quote-unquote diet plans where you can shed weight, and then you just put it back on. It's oh gosh, this isn't helping. But I really find the program to be easy to follow, and then they give you a way to kind of change your habits for life in a way where you don't feel like you're on a lifelong diet, and you can stick to it, which has been awesome. I had a friend start think she started last week, and she said she's down 6 pounds, which is awesome, awesome, awesome. So if you have been hearing me talk about Eastside Weight Loss Clinic, maybe you have a wedding coming up or some special event where you're like, man, I need to get this weight off that I've just been carrying around since the pandemic. EastsideWeightLossClinic.com, EastsideWeightLossClinic.com. Schedule a free 15-minute consultation with the fabulous Dr. Ryan Coogan and his team. They are awesome. Okay, let's get to questions and comments from the stream today. It was a lively comment sections across the board today. Good ones. Nicole and I were just discussing we need to have a comment of the day where it's like the best comment from today. Maybe we'll start that soon.
Yes.
On the lawsuit over 5599, Brandon says we should discuss issues with heart and logic, but we must not make laws using emotion. 100%. I think it's okay to talk about the emotional impact of laws, but I don't think that that is the reason to put new laws on the books specifically. And I think there's a lot of laws that are a solution in search of a problem, where it's like, hey, this isn't a problem right now, but in case it ever becomes one, like, let's put another law on the books. I think, personally, that there should be a limit to the number of bills that can be passed in any legislative session. And then that way they really have to prioritize only the important ones. Like, we don't need, I would be curious if there's a number out there for how many laws Washington State has. We do not need any more. We're doing fine. So enough of these solutions in search of a problem. Kyle said, I'm honestly not worried about the supposed good intentions of the representatives who supported 5599. If they voted for something so terrible, they should be held accountable regardless of intention. Oh, Matt, this was a funny comment, kind of sad, really misleading. He said, I know it's easy to give up hope and lose faith in your fellow man. I know the agonizing headlines day after day can be overwhelming and anxiety-inducing, but the important thing you must remember is this. Things will get worse, much worse, worse than you could ever imagine. Matt, why you gotta be such a sad sack? Man, seriously.
And the thing is, they could change. It could get better if we make changes.
Yes.
Right?
Right. That's what we're trying to
Hope.
do. We're just
Common
working
sense.
on it. Let's see. Laura, fairly new commenter. I don't know that I've seen that name. Amazon said virtue signaling, Amazon said. So on Amazon and some of these downtown businesses in Seattle that are like just hanging on to a thread, given the environment, Laura says virtue signaling isn't working for Nordstrom. They should close the flagship store. Sad but true. I hope they don't. I hope that the city can work with them to figure it out. Let's see. Diana says Amazon kind of did this to themselves. When you spoil a child, they do have tantrums. Yeah.
She's not wrong.
So true. Kyle said, heck,
they do
even
act like
Zoom is
children.
requiring people to return to work in person. I feel for people who moved away because they heard that work from home was going to be a forever thing, but it's not. You had a friend that happened to that you were saying.
It's somebody, a friend that works at Nordstrom. He told me that a coworker had moved to Chicago and I think that had papers signed to buy a house. Like, in order to get the mortgage, she had to have something signed saying she could work from home. She worked from home for about 3 weeks in Chicago, and then they mandated they return. And she had been given some time, but she ended up finding a new job because that's your freedom.
Yeah, I think you have to be a little reasonable about it. Like, hey, there were some employees who were anticipating or maybe even took jobs or were told you can work from home. They made lifestyle changes. They moved away. And if there's an abrupt change, you either have to value them enough as an employee to work with them, or you have to give them enough time and be reasonable and say, hey, you're going to have to find a new job. I'm sorry, this is the direction that we've gone, but we'll try to work with you. Don't be a jerk company and be like, you're fired tomorrow. So hopefully that's not what's happening. Let's see here. Mugshot Espresso says, I'm sick of Amazon's traffic. Hey, that's what helps our city. Brandon says...
and it didn't go away when they were all working from home. There was still traffic.
Well, yeah. I mean, I know that it's worse now, for sure. Let me see. What else we got here? Todd says, I am a tech worker. I have worked from home for over 4 years, but my employer is going to start having many return to work in January. It is up to me to either go back or choose to find another job. Todd, it's because you have common sense. You're like, I'm not beholden to them. And again, I know it's not as easy as like, quitting my job today because they're not doing everything I want. But you also have to realize that you're not in charge. You're not the boss. And that's what you get for working. I mean, I am the boss. Nicole, you're going to have to work from the office. I've never promised a work from home environment.
And I'll right now, I'm determining that it is worth coming into work.
Good. Okay, good. Glad. I hope you always
I'll let you
think
know if
so.
it changes.
On Chicago and the request that gangbangers only shoot each other between the hours of 9 p.m. and 9 a.m., Kyle says this was my favorite comment of the day. If I were doing a comment of the day. Kyle says, next thing you know, they'll be setting up a coliseum so the gangbangers can settle disputes in a controlled environment. Pistols at dawn, unless dawn is close to 9 a.m., which I actually wouldn't mind this. Like, hey, you're going to shoot each other anyway. Go do it inside this building.
Yeah.
Go do it inside this building. And then no one else will get hurt. Devlin, could the gang members try to work from home instead of going to their office in street corner to do their shootings? Have to agree with that. All right, good questions and comments today. Let's work on that, Nicole. Maybe a little open musical comment of the day.
Okay, I like it.
Something like that. I don't know, something like that.
On it.
All right. Okay, in all seriousness, as we wrap up the show today and a week of shows, every day of which we focused on the Wendy Trainer case, I want to make a closing plea for sanity. Let's get to it. So we, as I mentioned off the top of the show, we've been talking about Wendy Trainer's case all week. And, thankfully her family took it upon themselves to reach out to the media and to try to bring attention to the case. Otherwise, I don't think that we would have known what was happening. Wendy Trainer was killed in 2017. Her killer, Joshua Ellis, was convicted in 2019. And I think for a lot of people, they thought, oh, well, that's it. But then, of course, there was an appeal, and it was overturned on appeal for technicalities. And now here we are with the family going in. And actually, Nicole, we heard it's 11 a.m. tomorrow, not 1:30 p.m. I don't know if that changed, but the family is saying the hearing's at 11 a.m. So either way, we will absolutely update you on it. But I think it is, and Mark Lindquist said this really well, I don't know that there is anyone who is thinking rationally who would say that what Joshua Ellis is being gifted, and that's really what this is, makes sense, is justice. You're talking about a young woman who's 25 years old, her entire life, her entire adult life, taken away from her in an act of domestic violence, shot in the back of the head. And to think that this man could get out of prison by 2025 for doing something so horrible, not only is a slap in the face to the family of Wendy Trainer, but it's a slap in the face to every single person in this state who values law and order, who expects there to be respect for the rule of law. And it is a degradation, if this plea deal is allowed to go through, it is a degradation of law and order. And it emboldens criminal elements to say, not only can now we get away with all sorts of petty crimes, misdemeanor crimes, but hey, I kill someone in cold blood, 7 years, 8 years, prosecutors will be too scared to risk going to trial. 7 years, maybe they'll decide that that's worth it to carry out whatever sort of vengeance that they want to carry out. So I just want to say that although tomorrow really is about Wendy Trainer, and it really is about this young, vibrant woman whose life was taken from us and getting justice for her family. But it is also about Pierce County prosecutors deciding what side of the justice system they truly want to be on. Are they on the side of violent criminals? Or are they on the side of justice and victims and public safety and the rule of law? You would think the answer is clear. But so far, we've been given no indication that they're going to back away from this plea, which would truly be insane. So we will keep all of you updated. I appreciate those of you who reached out on behalf of Wendy's family to the elected prosecutor in Pierce County to offer your concerns with the plea. So we will have much more on that. As I said, later today, I'll have a story posted. We'll lift the paywall on it, and I just encourage you to share it all over the place to get some last-minute attention towards what's happening in Wendy's case. Absolute travesty. All right, that has been it for today's episode of Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. Thank you for caring so much about the issues that we talk about on the show. I truly appreciate it. If you have not become a subscriber already, please help us continue to do this show. Please help make sure Nicole never has to work from home, doing a different job. undividedpod.com, undividedpod.com, $5 a month. That's it. We will see subscribers on the Sunday show. We're going to be joined by Jim Walsh, who is the newly elected chair of the Washington State Republican Party. So we'll have that episode for subscribers on Sunday. I'll see the rest of you back here on the live show Monday at noon.